We now have some time, just sort of 5, maybe 10 minutes before lunch, just to reflect on some of what we've heard today, particularly from the speakers who, for time reasons, we weren't able to cover off in some of the discussions. So, Matthew.
2 things strike me. One is about expectations. I said, and I think I stand by the view that what one should expect of one's communication services, or indeed any services, is profoundly a matter for elected representatives. Those frameworks must be set by politicians. It's the fundamental role of the state to decide whether there are things that the state will deliver because it thinks they are sufficiently important that it should intervene where markets fail to provide. What I think today has brought out for me is there is a sort of a more medium-term shortfall, which is somebody is doing something. In a lot of cases, it is the state, but it's not exclusively about the state. But there are a lot of people who simply do not know that it is happening. As a consequence, their expectations are not realistic. Either because you think you should be able to move to, and this may not be a perfect description of Butte, so I'm generalising, but Butte has inspired the thought, either because you are moving to a remote island off the mainland and you think you should have access to broadband, which may be a naive expectation to have in the first place, or you think you're not going to get something and are justifiably angry and upset about it, when in fact there's a very good likelihood that it's going to happen to you in a year, and if only you knew about it, maybe you'd feel a whole lot happier about it. So I think there is something about the medium term where a coordinated failure among operators, regulators, and other organs of the state are failing possibly to be clearer about the long-term framework, but absolutely about what people can expect in the next few years. Let's put it that way. The other thing I wanted to say was, Colin, you mentioned surely you should just be able to get a signal wherever you are. And I think for me, I just wanted to raise this because it's been a long-running issue for Ofcom. National roaming, I think, is the classic example of regulatory failure in the area where a very simple request very quickly falls foul and fails to be a solution to what looks like a very simple problem. I mean, it's technically difficult to get a seamless service where you're roaming from one operator to another, but that's not the point. The real problem with national roaming is that the moment you say to somebody, please build your infrastructure where the commercial returns are marginal, oh, but by the way, the moment you do it, everybody else can piggyback on your infrastructure and take away the very, very marginal profit that made you want to go there in the first place. Actually, you don't only not achieve your objective, but you result in operators not going to those marginal locations in the first place. The market actually reduces in terms of what it will supply, and you actually increase the problem. I don't want to belabor national roaming itself, but it is a great example of what sounds like an absolutely sensible suggestion where a bit of analysis and a bit of thinking suggests that that solution at least may be disproportionate to the problem in hand, and it's why the state should nonetheless be cautious in where it steps in, because intervention doesn't always achieve the outcomes that it's seeking to achieve.
Thanks, Matthew. David.
My comments are also about the medium term, and I think the problem that we're facing is that we know there will be 16% who want the coverage by 2016, but there's a far higher proportion of the population who fear that they may be part of 16%. And I'm caricaturing, but I think that the approach of High and perhaps BT is to say, we'll tell you when we're certain, and that's not a very clever way of managing uncertainty. Because what we need to know as quickly as possible are the places where it's going to have to be a community solution, including local business solution, and so that as quickly as possible we can start working with these communities to explore these solutions. So there's an issue about communication about the technology as well as the communications technology here.
Absolutely, yeah. Jen.
Unfortunately, I just wanted to pick up on just one or two, I think, important points that haven't been mentioned yet, but when I tried to write them down, I couldn't fit them all onto one side of the board, so I'll try and restrain myself. One of the, I buy telecommunication services for the University of the Highlands and Islands. So I'm an enterprise customer, not an enterprise supplier in this space, but I think that the challenges that we have in our organisation are shared by other public agencies in the region and by not by SMEs, but by businesses who operate on more than one premise, which is that we're comparing the Highlands and Islands to a city like Glasgow, which has 4 universities in a small area, and that there is enough population to sustain all 4 of them. Our challenge, and it's the same reason why Highland is such an enormous geographic territory as a local authority, is that to have a sufficient population, or in our terms, to have a sufficient cohort to deliver services, we have to gather over a large territory to gain the number of individuals to have a university which has classes that are large enough to teach. But they're geographically dispersed. So in Glasgow there are 4 universities and they're all essentially single-site institutions, multi-site perhaps. If they had a couple of sites, in telecoms terms, they would buy telecoms between them, they buy enormous capacity once, and that wouldn't cost very much. And this really came home to me. I was overhearing a discussion with colleagues. The cameras are running, are they? I won't name any names. It's a central belt institution, and colleagues in the sector were bemoaning the cost of servicing it, because it costs £45,000 a year to buy a data circuit to it. Single campus university. It cost me only a third of that to service Dornoch. Now they're buying a gigabit to Sterling. For Dornoch I'm buying 5 megabits, and it cost me £15,000 a year. So my costs are all in the wrong direction. Sterling's a big campus university, thousands of students, so the per capita costs of that service are ignorable down to postage stamp levels. Dornoch I'm servicing 50 people, it costs me £15,000 a year. That costs pointing all in the wrong direction for me, per capita terms, but that isn't my problem. My problem is that I have to do that 50 times. We're servicing 100 sites, whereas a comparable institution in a dense area is on a couple of sites. So all my drivers are in the wrong direction. And I'm buying low bandwidth services at all these sites, because if I started buying high bandwidth services at all of them, I'd still have to do 100 times. Now, actually, of course, in Dornoch, the reason it's so expensive, I can only get 5 megabits because there are no 10 megabit services at all. The Next Generation Access Programme will help with that, so I aspire to being able to buy 10 megabit services in due course, but I'll still have to do it 100 times. My cost base is completely in the wrong direction. And at each of these places, there are hardly any end users. And I think that is the key problem for all multi-site public agencies here. It's not just that it's expensive and then multiplied by 100. But the other problem I have is that we're looking for coverage going up to 80-odd% of territory. We have a very unfortunate 80-20 rule going on here, which is that I can solve 80% of my problems in 20% of my time, and I spend 80% of my time on the other 20%, and I spend 80% of my cost on the other 20% as well. And I can't just solve the problem for 80%. I still have to solve the other 20%, and I still have to consume enormous human resource and money solving it, which is why we need universal service. Because as an institution, and the same goes for other agencies, we can't move, for instance, to doing things online or by video or everything successfully unless we can stop doing it the other way. But if we have to carry on doing it the other way as well for the other 20% of the user base, then we've just doubled our costs now.
Jem, I think that principle about keeping, if I may call them, the old analogue services going, can be said of many other public services in the area as well, to the extent that stuff isn't available, the digital stuff. You have to continue to provide the face-to-face and the old way of doing it. So
we absolutely need to deliver our services ubiquitously in only one way. We can't afford to have multiple ways of doing the same thing.
Thank you for that. Ewan, did you have your hand up? No?
See lots of things. Edinburgh University recently two professors at Edinburgh University recently ran a course which had 290,000 students, I think, signed up. One of my pals in the US had 70,000 students signed up on the course. So the question of geography has gone out the window. The technology base has changed. You can sit anywhere with a moderately good broadband connection. A couple of megs is enough, and you can participate in a course from Coursera at world-class levels. That's an interesting challenge. As someone who used to teach in one of UK's most rural universities, University of Wales at Lampeter, as it then was, that really is quite challenging. How are you going to match that? The thing that surprises me I'm sorry, to pick up something Matthew said, it was very interesting, a sort of gratuitous comment made on Wednesday by Mike Sharp from Telefonica, because you're saying, no, we don't want national roaming. National roaming isn't something clearly the operators don't like, and that's a regulatory process going down that. You're just not going to get it. But listening to the question from FSB, I was reminded of one of my friends who did some work in Mauritania. And in Mauritania, they have you think you've got rural problems. It's 4 million square kilometres. It's 1 million. Is it 4 million square kilometres and 1 million people? They had community masts put in. The problem there was not the mast, which is relatively cheap to do. The problem was, ironically, that there was no mains electricity. And what they were doing was at that time putting in diesel generators, and so the community was coming together to provide the mast, the security around the mast, and the diesel generator. Now, ironically, in Mauritania, you've no problem now with photovoltaics. The problem is, how do you get the backhaul? The French government had a problem with GSM coverage, and how they solved that was to put in the masts. The French government paid France Télécom to do that, but it was then available to all the operators, so it was competitively neutral. So can you get the mast in? Can you get it competitively neutral? And for people who've got really poor coverage, you do what all my friends in Africa do, and that is you have either a phone with 2 SIM cards, or you have a handful of SIM cards, and you say, oh, there's no coverage on Vodafone, and you switch to Orange or whatever, and that works. And you can actually get those really very, very cheaply multiple SIM card phones now. You can switch over. And if you're using for data service, that's a good.
So solutions to be had somewhere.
Oh, there are lots of solutions.
Tara, perhaps the final comment from you.
I was just going to say is that there was mention of the fact that communities need to know if they're in that band that aren't going to get covered. Well, High have released the 5 million for the community broadband fund now and they've got 5 community development officers who are now in place and who are going out specifically to those communities. So they already know who they are, I think, and that they won't be reached. In theory, they should, if that's where. But then who are they going to? I mean, I think in terms of, I think what they're doing is at least preparing certain communities to not be covered, at least.
Soften them up.
Well, it might well be the case. I mean, might well be the case. But I think that it comes back again to exactly what's being said about expectations, is that people in rural areas are aware that things might not be perfect for them, and they are aware that things are different, and they are aware that it might cost more money, but at the same time is making sure that they are informed of exactly what they're going to get, when they're going to get it, I think is crucial. And so at least they can, as resourceful as they can, then look at possible solutions if they're not going to be part of the great High rollout.
Absolutely, I think that's a really good point to end on. And just concluding remarks from me, to the extent that Ofcom can be part or help to facilitate what Matthew called that coordinated failure, to be clear about what's going to happen next and what people can expect and when, that's something that we can take away and have a look at where we have that role where we have a role to play. The other thing I want to take away is actually the role of our communications consumer panel around that kind of consumer difference of experience, bearing in mind it's not just all about the numbers, but there are some big variability in what people are actually experiencing. Could I just thank, in particular, all of the speakers who have contributed today, and indeed everybody around the table who's contributed today. And can I also, as I suggested I would, invite you all essentially to give a clap to yourselves for participation, but to the speakers in the session this afternoon. So thank you very much.